this big hide. Now notice how many little cosmetic flaws, little bug bites and brands. This is what we usually cut around. So scratch and dent, we take all those that we cut around and we use the hides that have too many flaws so we can reduce our waste, and it gets you a product at 30% off, and it helps us get rid of all this scrap instead of going to landfill, and it's live right now, so check out Scratch and Dent. This is the M1917 boot, which was the very first boot used by the American troops in World War I, and it's the very first boot to use the world famous Munson Last. And I think this boot is absolutely gorgeous. It's one of my most favorite looking boots of all time. But this boot only saw service for a year before they went back to the drawing boards to try to improve it. So we're gonna cut this over 100-year-old boot in half to see why it only had a year of service. And the coolest thing about this is, for the first time in internet history, if not history in general, we get to actually see what's inside this M1917 boot. So what is this boot? Well, there's various brands that manufactured this boot over the years, but the style is the M1917 boot. They weighed 1 pound, 10 ounces. We don't know what the retail price was because they're military boots, and they were made in the United States of America. And as for positioning, there's something I had no idea about this boot and the inspiration of it until I re-recorded it this time with all this additional information. But this was inspired by a French boot that we'll talk about in a bit. Then what is this boot? Well, this is finally, after like 3 years after this original video posted, after it got demonetized, we re-uploaded it, then it got restricted because of various words and imagery. We finally made the M1917 reproduction boot. So what is this boot? Well, the brand is Casualty x Rose Anvil. The style is the M1917 reproduction boot. They weigh 1 pound, 11 ounces, so really close to the original. They're made in Portugal, and the way we position this product is basically this video, and that's kind of why I wanted to do this video again, because not only did it get restricted so no one can hardly see the old video, so instead of just re-recording the same video, I thought we'd just rework this video, post it again in hopes that it doesn't get demonetized or restricted, add some additional information, and show you after the initial video like 3 years ago, we finally made it. So if you do want a pair of these, check them out below. It's probably just a one-time run, limited quantities, and huge shout out to Caswell for doing this project with us. And like I said, we're gonna add some more context, some more information, just to spruce up this video in hopes that YouTube doesn't kill it again. And the history of this boot starts in 1912 when Edward L. Munson publishes the book, The Soldier's Foot and the Military Shoe, which was a study of 2,000 soldiers over 4 years to find the best shape for a shoe. And this book led to the creation of the Munson Last because of his last name. And the whole concept of this last was to fit as many soldiers as comfortably as possible. Because in the 1800s, the vast majority of shoes were super pointy and they squished all your toes to the front. The Munson Last was one of the very first widely produced last that was fairly anatomical. And then just a couple years later, July 28th, 1914, World War I starts. And from 1914 to 1917, the US provided aid to the Allied forces, including boots built on the Munson Last, but avoided fighting until April 4th, 1917, when the US entered World War I. And the US military quickly realized that this war was all about trench warfare. And if you don't know what trench warfare is, it's essentially, instead of standing in lines like the Civil War, they advanced a little bit and started digging trenches to fight at each other. Barbed wire, mortar shells, people shooting at each other, very little progression on the war front. It was a very terrible way to fight a war. But more importantly, trench warfare led to a lot of water in the trenches. And this M1917 boot was not ready for really wet trench warfare. But by the end of the year, leading into 1918, casualties and trench foot was so heavy and so prevalent that they were forced to go back to the drawing board and come out with the Pershing boot. And to put in perspective how detrimental and devastating trench foot was to the Allied forces, even after revamping this boot after a year, there was over 75,000 casualties caused by trench foot over the course of the year for the Allied forces. And when I initially recorded this video, I didn't even really understand what a casualty meant, but now after reading through the comments and doing some more war videos, casualties can be anything from a death to a soldier being incapable of fighting in the war. Because if you think about it, if you're injured in any way and you need 2 soldiers to limp you along the way, you're not just down 1 soldier hobbled around, you're down essentially 3 soldiers. So instead, when you were injured enough that you needed that kind of help, they would ship you back to the infirmary, try to get you healed up, and then send you right back to the front lines. So that makes a lot more sense of how you can have so many casualties caused by what we're about to talk about with trench foot, because if you have any amount of trench foot, you can't walk. That's just a quick clarification of what a casualty actually is. And trench foot clearly is very devastating. So what is trench foot if you have no idea? Well, trench foot was first reported in 1812 by the French army when Napoleon's army was retreating from Russia. But trench foot really became well known during World War I because of how big the impact was. Well, what is it that actually causes trench foot? According to Wikipedia, unlike frostbite, trench foot does not require freezing temperatures. It can occur in temperatures of 60
16 degrees Celsius or 61 degrees Fahrenheit, so really not that cold, and within as few as 13 hours. And exposure to these environmental conditions causes deterioration and destruction of the capillaries and leads to damage of the surrounding flesh. Excessive sweating has long been regarded as a contributory cause. Unsanitary, cold, and wet conditions can also cause trench foot. But what does trench foot actually feel like, and what does it do, and what are the signs and symptoms? Well, trench foot frequently begins with a feeling of tingling and an itch in an affected area, and subsequently progresses to numbness or pain. The feet become red or blue as a result of the poor blood supply. Later, as the condition worsens, feet can start to swell and smell of decay as muscle and tissue become Macerate. As muscle and tissue becomes macerated. Advanced trench foot often involves blisters and open sores which lead to fungal infections. This is sometimes called jungle rot, which we covered in the Jungle Boot video and how they kind of tried to solve this issue. It's really pretty interesting if you haven't seen it. So trench foot's clearly no joke. And how do you prevent trench foot? Well, the ways that they used to do this is they'd send you the boots 2 sizes too big so that you could wear 2 layers of socks. Also thoroughly clean and dry your feet, put clean dry socks on, treat the affected area with warm packs or soaking it in warm water. When sleeping, let your feet dry out, let the moisture dissipate, and basically everything else you can think of that would be literally impossible inside of a trench in World War I. And since doing this video initially, I've found even more ridiculous ways that people try to prevent the trench foot, because we think now in the modern era, oh, there's medical, there's antibiotics, there's all these things. This is the early 1900s. Medical advancements were not prevalent back then. It was very barbaric, very old school. So what were some of the ways? Well, obviously there's powders, there was wool socks, they'd even put Vaseline on their foot, put a sock around it, more Vaseline, another layer of sock, more Vaseline, just to try to prevent any water, and especially the dirty water, getting to the inside of the shoe. They would use well oil. They would even take the packaging and wrappers from like wax paper or anything that was somewhat water resistant, and they would sandwich it between 2 layers of socks just to get some amount of water resistance. There's even stories of soldiers giving each other foot massages at the end of the day just to try to get that blood circulating through their feet, because when you're standing in water, it slows down circulation, but when it's cold water, it almost stops circulation entirely. So when you have a foot that's not able to heal because there's no circulation, that's when trench foot really gets out of control. And really the most effective thing that they did to prevent trench foot was just duck boards. So instead of waiting around in water all day, they would build platforms over top of the water that you're walking on boards rather than in the water. And that solved a lot of problems, including all the human waste that was in the water, all the animal waste, because the rats were rampant in the trenches. And there's tales in quotation of rats being as big as cats in there. And if you really want to see what this was like to some degree, go watch All Quiet on the Western Front. It'll probably change your perspective on this whole video if you haven't seen it. And you might be thinking that, oh, trench foot is no longer an issue for humanity, but there's a lot of jobs and a lot of hobbies that people inadvertently end up getting trench foot, whether they're coal miners, people who work in water all day, hiking, spelunking. And if you're not careful, like we mentioned, trench foot can happen in 61 degrees and in 13 hours. Then if we look at the sole construction, where this boot on the surface looks like it's a super high quality boot, and even today, if you built this boot, this would be as about a high quality as anyone makes today. But when you put this much leather in water, you're gonna have a lot of problems, because this thing is chock full of leather. It's got a full length leather midsole, a half length leather slip sole that's tapered down. It has 4 layers of leather in the heel stack, and it has this leather half sole on the forefoot with all the hobnails and the nails going to the inside. Which, if you look at all these hobnails, you can only imagine with this many nails going into the inside of the boot and this many nails tacking the boot together, it's only a matter of time before water keeps seeping in through the outsole as well. But something that's interesting about the hobnails is over time, especially climbing through all the trenches, especially with all the water rusting those nails out, they would eventually wear down. And something that's really cool is they had to replace the hobnails at some point. And so most people assume they would pull the old hobnails out and put the new ones in. But the problem was those boots were so waterlogged and so swollen and shrunken over and over and over again that if you remove those nails, the boots would fall apart. So what they did is they just have them drive more hobnails into the boots, which, imagine the weight of even more hobnails. And if you had to add 2 or 3 different layers in there, the whole body of the boot would be covered in metal. And so those boots had to end up being, what, like 4 or 5 pounds each, because they literally couldn't remove the old hobnails. So imagine trench foot, 5-pound boots covered in metal in nothing but literal water. World War I was human death on a level that no one had ever seen before. And if we look at the leather, leather is not the best material for water. Because I love leather. It's one of the best materials for footwear because it's equal parts durable, breathable, and flexible. And there's a reason why leather has been used in footwear ever since the invention of footwear. There's also a reason why rubber boots are almost exclusively used in wet conditions in the modern era. And that's because water seeps into the leather and slowly pulls out the conditioning and tanning compounds, which causes causes the leather to shrink, causes it to be brittle, and it causes it to be even less water resistant. And the thing is, once it's dry and once you start wearing these and the cracks are showing, the splits are happening, and the stitching holes start opening up, it's almost impossible to keep water out of this style of boot without constant conditioning and oiling and waxing, which, like we talked about, wasn't the easiest place to do it during trench warfare in the early 1900s. And then to the final area where water could have easily seeped in, and that's how this boot is built. But one of the cooler things I learned about this boot since recording it was this was not an original boot. I thought for sure that the Americans designed this, they try to do this, this, and this. This is a copy of a French boot. There's a French boot that looks exactly like this that was designed in the late 1800s that was used by the French military. So then how did the Americans end up stealing the design or copying it? Well, because initially a lot of the American forces were outfitted with the French boots. And so they just thought like, well, it's working for the French, why don't we just do the same thing? Let's just make the same French boots. But just like we mentioned with this American boot, the French redesigned that boot like 3 times in a couple years because it was originally designed in 1912, then they redesigned it after it failed miserably in 1915, and then again in 1916. So by the time this came out in 1917, it was already basically 3 boot iterations behind the French boot, and the French boot still failed. So this specific boot might be the biggest failure of boot or even equipment in all of military history. Because not only did it fail for one country, it failed for 2 different countries 2 or 3 times. So now let's cut this thing in half and finally see what's in this over 100-year-old boot, the first time as far as I understand on the internet. And maybe there's something else on the inside that we can point to that's causing even more of the issues that they changed in the next iteration of this boot. So let's cut them in half. All right, we got this thing cut in half, and if you want to see how we would preserve and revitalize an over 100-year-old boot, we did it on this boot for the Rose Anvil Builds channel, so go check that out. And now, let's see what's inside. And now that it's cut in half, you can see why, if you got these boots wet, it would take months to dry this thing out, because once all that water seeps into all these multiple layers of leather, you know, one layer of leather is hard enough to dry out, but having 6 or 8 stacked up pieces of leather that are holding on to that moisture, there's no way for it to get out, and it just keeps seeping in more and more every day, these boots would never dry out. And that's a big part of the reason why trench foot was so prevalent in these boots. What was the design flaw? Why did it flop so hard? I don't really think it was that bad of a design. I think it just was a bad design for the application. And I don't even think they really knew what they were getting into with World War I. I'm sure they kind of got it, But I don't think they anticipated this boot failing so miserably so fast. And so that's why they went back to the drawing board just a year later to come out with the M1918 boot. And what's crazy is if you compare these two boots, we didn't make this boot to try to match the original. We made it as just a modern heritage boot, but you can see how similar everything is. And the biggest difference is the simplicity of modern heritage design compared to the old school M1917 boot. Both are still heritage boots, still chock full of leather, still designed in a very similar fashion, still designed with the uppers almost identical, but the way it's executed is completely different, even though they're still heritage boots. Because the M1917, you can tell they hadn't fully refined how to make this style of boot. There's a lot of overlapping layers, a lot of redundancies, there's a lot of failure points in it, where the modernized version, it's just simple layers all the way through, simple construction, but obviously these are not made for war, so they don't need the redundancies. They don't need all the extra protection and the hobnails. But what's crazy is 100 years later, over 100 years later, boots are still being designed and made in a very similar fashion because it works. There's a reason why heritage boots are still around, and there's a reason why they used them in World War I, even though they were a terrible choice. And it's because they're durable, they last a long time. And to me, that's a testament to, even though they failed so miserably and maybe one of the biggest failures of all military equipment history, it still shows you that the methods and the techniques that were used over 100 years ago are still being utilized today to make some of the highest quality footwear in the world. And so with this one, I didn't want to make an exact replica similar to the John Lofgren's. I wanted a modernized version, and I think we freaking nailed it. So if you do want a pair of these, check them out below. Hopefully this video doesn't get demonetized or restricted like all the other times we tried to upload this. And thank you guys for watching this and supporting it again. Hopefully I added enough extra information in there to keep it interesting for you. And let me know what other military boots you want us to cut in half. And thank you guys for supporting this collaboration. So thank you guys. See ya.